the anti-abortion people, the anti-sex education people, and the anti-trans people aren't speaking to one another. So what's happening is that periods are continually being over legislated. And so there are some states in which not only are they blocking speech, but they're blocking access to products. And then they're also blocking things like data being subpoenaable, et cetera. So you're 100% right that the sex education things, problematic.
Super. Sorry, Colby, one more question.
Yep.
Did you want me to read bios out loud or just when I'm introing read names?
If you could do bios, that would be great. I put it, the timestamps will allow it.
Perfect.
I shorten them to make sure.
I
Wonderful.
should show you ladies before we go live. This is what I received today when I walked into the office.
What's the story behind that?
It's Monday.
Absolutely Monday.
It's Monday, and my office manager decided I needed a little pink pony.
Doesn't need a little pink pony.
Because I refused to get a real one.
Upkeep is challenging.
Arushi, can you go ahead and press record? And then once that's ready, we can kick off the panel.
Okay.
Okay, everyone ready?
Yes.
All right, Shailene, you can kick us off.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We have here today Colby Siegel, the Director of Partnerships and Menstrual Health Advocacy at the Desai Foundation, Dr. Corinne Frew, a reproductive endocrinologist and founder of Muna Fertility, Kieran Gandhi, an artist, activist, and the woman known for running the London Marathon Free Bleeding in 2015, and Florence Schechter, the founder of the Vagina Museum. I'll now turn it over to Mega to introduce the Pledge Your Period and Desai Foundation's work in menstrual health.
Hi, friends. Welcome. We're so happy to have you join us as we kick off Menstrual Health Education and Awareness Month, which is the month of May. At the Desai Foundation, we've been working in menstrual health for over 15 years, working in rural communities to ensure that women have access to the education, the products, and the information that they need to break the stigma and live their lives with dignity, finish their education, and participate in the workforce should they want to. Because we believe deeply that a period should never hold anyone back from anything that they want to pursue. And we believe deeply that everyone needs to participate in the campaign, both bleeders and non-bleeders alike. And so we kicked off the Pledge Your Period campaign about 9 years ago to help us all raise our voices in support of breaking the stigma around menstruation. Our Asani sanitary napkin program has reached 8 states, has 5 production centers, and has employed about a couple thousand women in terms of our sales and our production center. So the program itself has reached nearly 4 million folks in India. And we both educate boys and girls on the ground because we believe that you can't clap with one hand. So join us as we all clap together in celebration of Menstrual Health Hygiene Month with the Pledge Your Period campaign. The ask is that you post on social media about something around menstruation that matters to you, whether it's around education, stigma, etc. And remembering that menstrual health and hygiene issues are not just localized in one country. They actually span all over the world. And so the more we sing together, the more we break these stigmas, the faster and sooner we can resolve these unfair laws, policies, stigmas, and circumstances so that everyone can thrive. Thank you for being here, and we're so honored to have our incredible panel members here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mega. And as a side note, I'm your moderator, Shalene Gupta, author of the cycle Confronting the Pain of Periods and PMDD. Now, to kick us off, I want to ground this conversation in a moment that sparked a global dialogue around menstruation and visibility. Kiran Gandhi, when you ran the marathon while free bleeding, reactions ranged from support to criticism. How did these responses reveal the way society polices menstruating bodies? And were there any reactions that particularly surprised you?
I love this question. I think what was the most illuminating was how we disguise disgust and misogyny under this kind of allure of care and consideration for other people. And so it was really important that the dialogue was so polarizing because I actually, as the sort of performance artist, if you will, in that moment, could actually take a step back and allow society to witness its own deep-seated misogyny. So things like that's so inconsiderate, how, that's so unhygienic, even though I'm not touching anybody, we did laundry afterwards. Like, it wasn't, it's not what people were claiming it to be. And I think what it revealed 10 years ago was this notion that what our bodies do are a burden to other people, that we are inconsiderate to other people, that just because we're not sexually consumable at all times, and we're not the object of somebody else's desire at all times, and this kind of thing, that we are less than or disgusting or shameful. And so it was really important to sort of fact check and sort of see people respond and be like, yeah, but wait a second, why are we calling it disgusting, or why are we calling it unsanitary or unhygienic when that's actually not what's happening here. And I think for me personally, it was really nice to kind of sidestep the deep-seated misogyny and actually look more at critical fact and education. And the final thing I'll share about that is one of the biggest things that I learned from that experience is that we were not talking about menstruation to the level that luckily we all are now. And when we don't talk about menstruation, we're actually robbing each other of the opportunity to educate each other and to tell each other about our authentic experiences that our bodies do. And it's really so wonderful to see now the level of awareness around endometriosis, just because we're talking about it, the level of legitimization of people's pain and discomfort when bleeding, and sort of the level of awareness of what different symptoms actually can mean. So you can catch certain diseases sooner and certain, reproductive health issues much sooner. So it's incredible. And I'll say one final thing, that I love your work looking at PMDD specifically, because I think we focus so much on physical symptoms, but the hormonal and mental health symptoms of our cycle is really having a moment now, especially post pandemic. And so I love watching this journey expand and where we are now in this global menstrual health campaign.
Karen, I just wanted to follow up. Um, you know, it takes a lot to overcome stigma, and back when you were doing the marathon, the conversation wasn't where it was now. What did it take for you internally to overcome stigma, to prepare to do this act in public that, made you an international name?
Mm. I so appreciate that. I think what made it work for me personally is that I had never run a marathon in my life, and let alone having to do it on day one of my cycle. And as it is, I was nervous, and that marathon period aside, on a personal level, it represented my own commitment to my own strength, my own body, my own mind, and sort of what is possible for me as a human when I put my mind to something. And so I felt when I was running and bleeding, I was like, not only am I doing something amazing that already I'm so proud of, I'm doing it while bleeding. And it's actually going really well. And like, this is amazing. And why are we not celebrating the fact that women and people who bleed all over the world are having their periods while doing incredible things like leading companies and being parents and taking care of others and doing their contribution in the world? And not only are we not celebrating it, we have to hide it away in shame. And so I think the thing that gave me power is like this is ridiculous. Like we're out here bleeding and running marathons. Like what can't we do? And not only are we not celebrating that, we're hiding it away in shame. And so when I personally crossed the finish line, I was like, there is nothing I cannot do. I am 100% certain of it now, and I'm going to write about it. And when that story went viral, I think it felt like a win for all of us, because I felt the reflection back of like, yes, we're so awesome. Why are we not talking about it? So I think it was a sense of personal power that allowed me to destigmatize it in my own mind.
I love that so much, especially given that it's perfectly acceptable to find gunshot wounds and really gory images on TV, but not to bleed, which happens naturally to all of us. And so, just, turning again to this idea of visibility and building on that, let's talk about what it takes to create spaces where these conversations can actually happen. Florence Schechter, what inspired you to create the Vagina Museum? And can you also just give us a little bit of a rundown on what it is, what it looks like?
Yeah, of course. Well, it was 2017, and I'd found out that there was a penis museum in Iceland, which is great. Love it. And I thought, you know what? I wonder if there's a vagina museum. And there wasn't really. There was like a sort of website in Austria, and there were some specific museums. Like there's a Museum of Motherhood in Germany or something. Lots of women's museums, not really the same. No vagina museum. And so I tweeted quite flippantly. I was like, guys, there's a penis museum, there's no vagina museum. We should like totally make one. And then I was like, hold on a minute. No, we should make one. And I started talking to like my friends. I was working in science communication at the time, and my background is in biochemistry and a bit of healthcare. So I talked to like people in various industries, and asked them, if I did make a vagina museum, is that something you'd like? Would you be interested in that? What would you want to see there? And the response was just overwhelmingly positive. People, one of the biggest things was that people weren't sure where to get trustworthy information from, because they, their friends didn't know any much more than them. The internet is not a trustworthy place. I live in the UK, and getting a doctor's appointment can be very difficult here. And then when you do see a doctor, it's like 10 minutes and then it's in and out. And also sometimes the doctors don't give you good information, or dismiss you. There's so many people who go in with like really bad period pain, and the doctor just says, well, you just have to deal with that. That's what it's like having a period. That not all doctors are like that. I will point out, of course, as the other doctor on our panel, I know is internally panicking. Um, but yeah, so a lot of people were like, I want a place to go where I can trust that I will be getting good information. I'm not going to be shamed. There are going to be people who kind of share those values and everything. And health and anatomy and medicine were like the themes that kept coming up. People saying, I have endometriosis and no one's ever heard of it, and I don't know how to talk about it. Or dads who would say, I don't know how to talk about periods with my daughters. Like, no one's ever had that conversation with me. I have nothing to model. Um, so, yeah, decided I would just go do it, and did some pop-ups. And then we got our first building in Camden Market in 2019. And then now we're in a long-term home in Bethnal Green in East London. And in answer to the second part of your question, what can you see there? So if you go, it's completely free entry. There are three galleries. There is the permanent gallery called From A to V, which is like our gynecological 101 for people. So it's got four themes: anatomy, health and medicine, vulva diversity, and activism. Vulva diversity is my favorite bit because it's basically a wall of loads of vulvas.
And I actually went to the Vagina Museum where they actually did chocolate molds of different vulvas. I went on a particularly good day. I've been 3 times now, and I'm a big fan of your work. I went for a poetry reading another time, so I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to plus one the awesomeness of the Vagina Museum.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I think one of the things I love about the Vagina Museum is it's like quite fun. And we try to be silly where we can because it's like it's such a difficult topic for some people. And there are times when we have to talk about really, really serious things. And so to kind of offset that, and so we're not always depressed, we try and do lots of fun things as well. Um, because, yeah, I mean, it's a great part of the body. Why does it always have to be like fighting stigma and shame and whatever? We want to be getting to the good place where it's like your vulva's amazing, it gives you pleasure, it makes babies, and also it's just like a part of your body. And yeah. Um, so that's the permanent gallery. Then there's a temporary gallery. The current exhibition is about menopause, and then the next one I think is going to be about history of activism. Um, and then there is also the third gallery is a community gallery where people come in and put on their own things like activists, artists, patient groups, charities, that sort of thing. That's our community gallery. So that's what you can see there.
Florence, thank you so much for that tour. I live in envy, especially as here in the States, as we were talking about just earlier, the education is actually regressing. And to that effect, and through this museum, you've created a space that directly confronts the stigma around bodies and menstruation, and that's something the Pledge Your Period movement also aims to do. What have you learned about what actually helps people move from discomfort or silence into a more open and informed conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because, like a lot of people who are passionate about this type of thing, it's really hard to know what to do about it actually because yeah, we've not had much of it modeled for us. And what I would say, the first thing I've had thousands of conversations with people and changed a lot of minds. um, the first thing is modeling it. So if you want to make somebody else comfortable, you have to show that you're comfortable with it first. So, like, for example, I talk really openly, like when I'm on my period. For example, I'm currently waiting for my period to start. I'm looking at my app and I'm like, it's going to be any day now. And I tell my friends that, and then they're suddenly okay with telling me about their periods. And it's the same with everything. Like if you're comfortable with it, sharing your experiences, if you've had a miscarriage or an abortion, and those difficult, really difficult ones as well. Because next time, if that happens to someone, they'll go, well, she was happy with sharing that information with me. Maybe I can go to her about it and get support. Um, and then also modeling the right language. So, like, for example, there's a lot of discussion about vulva and vagina because the external genitalia is properly called vulva. Many people call it vagina. And I know in the sex education world, we get very annoyed about it. And like rightly so, because if you were going to go to your doctor and you said, my vagina hurts, and then they start, putting a speculum in, and you're like, that's not what I meant, it can be very upsetting. So it's good to know, what the proper words are. But what I don't do is I don't correct people. Unless they are a sex educator themselves, and I'm like, you should know better. When it's just regular people, I will just use the word vulva, and then what other people will do is they will kind of internally clock and go, oh yeah, no, that is the right word. I must do that. And then they'll start copying you. Basically social pressure, but nice. Um, so yeah, destigmatizing best way I think is to model it and just, the world will kind of come to you.
I love that. It's such a great model, and may we all be able to follow that. Turning it over to Dr. Karen Frew and shifting from the public spaces into the more clinical and personal ones, I'd love to explore how stigma shows up in healthcare settings. So, Dr. Frew, how do cultural norms around menstruation show up in the ways that patients describe their symptoms?
That's a very good question. And I'll answer that question right after I tell Florence that I have two young daughters and they understand vulva versus vagina. That's something else we could do. They, they, they don't know their vagina is an external thing, it's internal. And they know their vulva as the thing that needs cleaning during bath time. So if we start there, then by the time people become adults, properly tell me what their symptoms are, and we can go from there. But culturally, providing culturally sensitive care is one of those things that involves simply being curious, asking from a place of curiosity. There is no one model, for example, of Black woman in the US, or immigrant, or Indian, or white, I mean, etc. Each person is unique. So understanding the context in which that person grew up helps with delivering care in a way that honors them. So when I set out to found Muna Fertility, it's a fertility clinic, but in order to even start to treat or address whatever the patient needs addressed, you need to understand what they have lived through, what they consider normal versus not, and that part's usually very shocking. We start by talking about the frequency of periods, the character of the periods, all these details. And some people will say, I bleed for 8 days, and that is normal. And I go, whoa, whoa. Tell me, are we heavy for 8 days? Because that is not normal. I need to take medication for the first 2 days, round the clock. And that's just normal for me. It happens to all the women in my family. I go, no, your period should be this thing that happens to you and doesn't sideline you. It should be something that happens as part of your life and not like the focus of your life for a period of time. Like this cannot continue. And it's amazing to me how much women have just internalized the suffering. It is like they consider it normal. And I'm like, no, 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 no. So my big push is to, after I get an understanding of where the patient is coming from, after I get an understanding of what care is acceptable to them or not acceptable to them, the next thing that I emphasize is that if there is discomfort anywhere in the body at any time, they should complain. Because if a patient doesn't complain to their treating physician, then I suppose that everything is fine. They are comfortable, their periods are not interfering with their lives, they are just moving through life with no complications. The only person that I will start, investigating for things like endometriosis or PMDD or any of the other diagnoses that we've heard are people who say, hey, this thing happens to me every month. It has happened to me ever since I started menstruating or bleeding. And I haven't mentioned it to anybody, but I wonder if this is typical, if this is normal. And you can then for me, I can go, no, that is not normal. That is so not normal. Your period should blend into the background. It should not be all consuming. And if it becomes all consuming, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. Does that answer the question?
I love that so much as someone who has PMDD and then wrote a book on it because, of course, your period is all consuming when you have a disorder. And why would that not be normal? So I love that
The
you
disorder is the disruption to the pattern.
exactly.
Yeah. So when there's a disruption, identify it and then complain about it. And if you complain and nothing is done about it, you move on to the next person and complain. And eventually somebody will go, that's interesting that you've had this thing going on for this long and have brought it up and they're willing to pay attention and just listen and address the problem. It's as simple as that, I find.
And so actually, you have this bird's eye view because you're seeing so many different people come into your clinic on a given
Mhm.
time. Can you just give us sort of a breakdown of, I don't know if roughly percentages work, but in what buckets are you seeing menstrual stigma fall into in conversations you have with your patients? Like what percent are hesitating to describe symptoms, what percent would you say are like well aware?
Mm, I would think that it's actually a minority of patients that come specifically to see me who are not willing to answer direct questions about their periods. They don't get an opportunity to not tell me because because I'm asking pointed questions that require answers, and I make it clear that I will listen to what the answer is. That is why I'm asking. Um, there's a reason for it. It's to see if the pattern fits what is typical and not really all consuming, or if it falls into the all consuming and there's a problem. And so I guess I don't really give people a chance to live in their stigma. Um, I destigmatize it by asking directly about it. Exactly how much do you bleed? And they go, oh, it's heavy. All right, you're going to have to quantify that for me. What level of pad are we using? Are we on the overnights with the giant wings? Are we doubling up on tampons and pads? Are we going through a super plus tampon in an hour? We get very specific. And if they tell me something that equals a problem, I go, oh, you're likely anemic. And they go, yeah, how do you know? Because you're losing too much blood. This is not what should be happening. We need to investigate that. We need to figure it out. So I think even though I'm encouraging patients to complain, not many grow up in a culture where complaining is encouraged or normal. Um, Black American women as a group, I see about 50% uh, that of my clientele, simply because I'm Black. Uh, they don't complain about much. They don't complain about the pain they're experiencing, which turns out to be endometriosis. They don't complain about the fibroids that are then causing the endometriosis. They don't complain about the heavy bleeding, even though they're wearing the Super Plus tampon and 2 pads just to get through work and have emergency supplies tucked in every corner of the house and car and bags, every single handbag, and will not wear white. You know, it's they just don't complain. Africans, on the other hand, we're wonderful complainers. We are taught to complain from a very early age. Things not going right, you complain. You don't want to do a certain task, you complain. In fact, the rule is complain but get the work done. If you don't complain, you don't care. And if you're sitting there worrying about something, then you do care and you should complain. So I'm trying to teach my American patients the art, the joy in complaining, the effectiveness of complaining, of doing it as a sign of respect to the person asking you the question.
I love
So,
both parts of these models. Like first, the joy of complaining, and second, this guiding with curiosity to open up conversation. And so as you describe in your work as a care practice, you describe your work as a care practice. What does that
yes.
mean to you, and how can this model be translated into other institutions like programs, schools, and public systems?
Oh, um, the reason so there's healthcare, right? And the way it is run, it sounds like in the UK and here, it is not health care, it is health management. There are efficiencies, and I say that in quotes, built into how many patients can be processed, not seen, not understood, not have problems solved for, just how many can be seen or processed in a day. And so you get patients getting put through almost in this compulsive way that does not allow any room for reflection. you can't pick up a pattern if all you're going in to do is ask a patient one question and then walk out of the room because you're done and you have to move on to the next patient, or your salary is going to be dinged, or you're going to be working until 9 p.m. doing notes. The system has been set up deliberately to undermine care. The only way you get care is through connecting with people. And so for my new patients, they are allowed a full hour to ask me questions and for me to ask them questions. And then I get an understanding. Lays the groundwork for how to move forward from there. So we have very clear objectives. Part of it is education, but also the other part is understanding where it is they're coming from, which things are important to them, which things will this person versus that person find acceptable in their care. Have they ever had a transvaginal ultrasound, or are they going to faint at the sight of the of the probe, right? And I have to explain things like all gynecologic instruments are long. That is so my hand is not sitting in your vagina during the assessment. You can be over there and I can be over here, and we can maintain what dignity we can while you are in the lithotropy position, legs, knees pointing towards the sky. Anyway, it's an undignified position. We do what we can. So the care is just reminding everybody involved, from my front desk through to anyone that you have to interact with at my practice, to see the human in front of them. And then we encourage the humans we're taking care of to see the human in us. So don't expect an instantaneous answer because that requires zero thought and only AI can process that fast. And so that can be expanded. I think it's a model that can be expanded if we just choose to value the time input over efficiencies that actually make the whole system less efficient, because you have to have 5 visits for the same problem as opposed to 1 thoughtful visit.
I love that we're seeing this underlying theme emerge, which is consistently the themes of connection and care. Simply, do we care enough about people who menstruate enough to connect with them about their own experiences? And so, speaking of own experiences, I, many of us are normalizing things before we even realize that they deserve attention. Colby, could you talk about things that you normalized for a long time that now you look back on differently, and how did you know it was time to talk to someone?
Yeah, so we've already talked a bit about this already, but I was diagnosed with endometriosis, and for a long time, I didn't know that that's what I was dealing with. I was taught that painful periods were just part of having a period, and that heavy bleeding, missing plans, and pushing through the pain was just being a woman. So I normalized those symptoms, and for me, it escalated really severely. I was going to the hospital almost every month. Doctors thought that it was a burst appendix or that I had a serial gastro issue, but it still wasn't being connected back to reproductive health. I saw 3 different gynecologists and I was dismissed by all of them. It actually took a male gastroenterologist who was working with me and couldn't find literally anything wrong, and finally goes, "This is happening once a month to you," and gave me a referral to a different gynecologist that's specialized in endometriosis. Um, and so one of the things that really got to me was it wasn't just about pain. It was that it was disrupting my entire life. I was planning my schedules around the fear that I might not make it to a social event or travel plans, or even in work. I wasn't taking as many vacation days because I knew I was going to be using more sick days and I was wanting to offhand the two. And that's not something to normalize. Um, and then in general, too, this connects back to the work that we do, that especially at the Desai Foundation, we do menstrual health education. And it's not just hygiene or access to the products, but it's actually understanding what's normal and what's not, and being able to feel empowered to continue to advocate yourself. Like, for example, it took me 4 doctors to get to the diagnosis, and now I'm living my life like a normal period should be. Um, and if you don't know that baseline knowledge of what it should look like, then it's really hard to advocate for yourself. And so it's really important to know the baseline and to advocate and to understand, oh, okay, like even maybe you don't know the baseline, but to always advocate for yourself and to just talk through everything with your doctor so they can really figure out what could be normal and what may not be normal.
Sounds to
And
me like Colby is pro complaining.
Yes. I've
go
learned.
complaining. And Colby, why do you think it was that it took you so long to realize that this was not normal?
I think part of it was I just didn't know much about all of these different chronic illnesses. And then on top of that, when you are going to, let's say, a gynecologist and they're dismissing you, you're more likely to take their word for it rather than knowing you're right, or at least that's how I was acting, because in my head I was like, they're the specialist, and if they're not finding something wrong, then maybe it is gastro related, or maybe it's something else that I don't know. And then um eventually I mean it, again, like I said, it was disrupting my life. I was going to the hospital, and that I know is not normal. So I just kept pushing, and eventually we figured out what the issue was.
I'm so glad that you figured it out. There are horrifying statistics out there, and Dr. Frew and Florence, you can jump in if I don't have them correct, but it takes over a decade to get a menstrual diagnosis, which is alarming. And in that time, we're seeing quality of life, and at times loss of life or permanent damage to the reproductive system, which is horrifying. And so these implications are unacceptable. And so as we talk about visibility and the personal experience, I want to zoom out to advocacy and what it takes to sustain this work over time. And Kieran, your advocacy has evolved from challenging menstrual stigma to also focus on climate, music, and gender equality. What does your advocacy look like today, and what have you learned about making this work effective, sustainable, and lasting?
Yeah, I really appreciate the tie-in, and I'm also learning so much on this call, which I'm really excited about. I think, one of the most interesting things that I've heard recently is that we don't have any periods on a planet that it is no longer. And so really expanding my viewpoint from not only a feminist perspective, but an eco-feminist perspective, and sort of this larger idea that the same way we exploit and treat women's bodies and people who bleed and trans bodies is the same way we treat nature and the planet. And it's very resource oriented, very extractive, and without care, without respect. And so personally, I think a lot about my own sustainability practices, even when it comes to my reproductive health. And so, for example, switching to reusable, so reusable underwear. I actually find the technology with so many different period companies in terms of, underwear or reusable cups, things like that, organic cotton tampons, if that's preferable, even the quality of the pads. People are making biodegradable pads. I was just at Women Deliver conference in Australia 3 days ago. We had an incredible discussion on menstrual health, and one of the guys debuted their pad that is like you can put it into the earth and then it returns to the planet. And so I think there's a level of, again, as we've been saying time and time again on this Zoom discussion today, the more we complain, the more we speak, the more we let people know that we want something better, the innovators come in and actually build it. And so, yeah, it started with personal sustainability practices around my own period care, because I don't like the idea that we've been given these options that, like, in order for us to bleed, we now have to pollute the planet. It's like, no, we as women demand better. We don't want to participate in this, and we didn't build systems with this kind of capitalist way in mind. and our bodies are one with the planet, and that actually there's ancient practices around, our menstrual blood actually being, related to the fertility of the planet and the health of the grass and the well-being and the sort of natural cycles that exist. It's kind of a no-brainer. So that's the sort of literal way that I've been including sustainability is like my own practice. And then exactly that, the more we feel comfortable, as Florence said earlier, talking about our practices, we encourage others to be comfortable vocalizing their practices as well. And then, yeah, musically, I think I have a great opportunity as a musician and as a lyricist to be writing ideas and putting them into these bodies of work that champion not only women's bodies but sustainability. So this has sort of been the larger tie-in, both my personal practices, but then also as an artist, putting these ideas and messages out into the world.
I love that you zoomed out to, the environment. Something that shocked me is the founders of Diva Cup, the menstrual cup, said that in the beginning they had an enormous difficulty marketing a menstrual cup because it was seen as extremely disgusting and stigmatized. So how do you sell a product that's good for the environment when you're not even allowed to talk
Mm,
about it?
mm. Yeah, I mean, the earlier menstrual underwear would leak, and it was not good. But again, any good innovation realizes there's an opportunity to solve a problem. And 10 years later, the quality of many different period underwear companies is like incredibly good sealing, incredibly good woven fabrics and technology that prevents leaks, is highly absorptive, and then easy to wash in the laundry. And I think it's a modern solution that prevents us putting toxic chemicals in our most sensitive part of our body, and then also prevents us from throwing non-biodegradable products into the earth. And so I think it's time. I think it's us talking about what we want. I think it's education, as again we've been talking on this call, and I think it's self-study. I think the more we self-study and feel empowered, as Colby was talking about it, she didn't give up on her own body. She like kept going after it and getting the help and resources that she needed. And now, hopefully other people can have, destigmatized endometriosis experiences. And so, yeah, similarly, my self-study is like, before I didn't think that I could have period underwear on day one of my cycle because it's too heavy. And lo and behold, the technology is good enough that I actually don't have to use tampons at all. And I feel fully sustainable when it comes to my cycle, which that's like a personal change that's happened in the last 5 years that feels really empowering and really in alignment with the things that I'm getting on a stage and talking about. So yeah, I always appreciate these conversations because I like to create sustainability first within myself before telling other people. And then I feel I'm able to spread the good message and pledge my period.
Echoing Florence's message of start the conversations. And, as these conversations get more traction globally, the question becomes, how do we turn awareness into real change? Colby, as menstruation enters more political and constitutional conversations, how do organizations like the Desai Foundation ensure that this momentum translates into dignity, access, and real change into people's daily lives?
A great question. So I think we're at a moment where menstruation's finally being talked in a political and legal space. Uh, as we've seen, attention doesn't automatically translate into impact. What matters really is whether the momentum shows up in people's daily lives. So there's some examples we're seeing both in India and the US. So in India, there's growing recognition of menstrual health under Article 21, which is the right to life and personal liberty. And it starts to frame menstruation as a basic human rights issue. But at the same time, in the US, we're seeing conversations around bodies and autonomy becoming more politicized and in some cases more restrictive. So periods are entering the conversation, but they're not always in ways that expand access or dignity. And in the US, we're really seeing periods as a political football, is what we like to say. Um, and that tension is important because the reality is no organization can solve this alone. So I can pull on the Decide Foundation, our focus is on making sure that the momentum actually reaches people on the ground. So through access to menstrual products, education that breaks stigma, and programs that center dignity in a very practical way. Beyond the direct impact, there's also responsibility to amplify. So we're actively calling on people to help us, governments, policymakers, influential voices to step in, things like hosting this panel, and just like anything you can possibly do to make your voices louder. Systematic change, there we go, requires alignment across sectors. It requires policy, it requires funding, education, and it needs cultural shifts altogether. And so for us, success isn't just that menstruation's being talked about more, but it's that fewer girls are missing school, fewer women are forced to choose between basic needs, and that more people are able to live their lives with dignity. And in order to do that, we have to move our conversation into collective activism, and that's when we see that everyone gets pulled in together to work for this common fight.
Cheers to doing the good work. Thank you so much, panelists, for weighing in. I'm now going to invite the audience to ask questions, and Arushi will share some selected questions for all of you.
While we're waiting for the first question to come in, the other hobby I now have is complaining to lawmakers to get out of medicine because they do not understand the nuance of and the level of decision making, joint shared decision making that has to happen for good medicine to happen. And they are putting restrictions on us that don't really protect anybody. They're endangering both the patients and the doctors who committed their lives to taking care of them. And I make that very clear. And on the topic of menstruation, I mean, you stop all menstruating in the world and we cease to exist. I don't, this is no two ways around that. You make periods go away and we lose access to eggs that will eventually turn into people. And so it's everybody's issue. Reproduction is everybody's issue. And they should stop talking about it like it's a woman's issue and stop pretending that it only affects a subset of women, because anyone who menstruates is potentially capable of becoming pregnant, and anyone who's pregnant is capable of pregnancy loss, which, by the way, the medical term is abortion. All pregnancy loss is abortion. And so, and then once you naturally stop menstruating, you are now in menopause. And that is a whole phase unto itself. And, 52% of the planet has to deal with it. And we are not inconsequential. I think we really need to seize our power back because we can do some things. There are more of us than that.
To your point about seizing our power, the first question came in, and it is for you. I love what Dr. Frew said about the joy of complaining and voicing discomfort. How can we, as patients and practitioners, begin to have these uncomfortable conversations about pain, especially pain that we don't understand, with each other?
Uh, I mean, yes, if there's one thing I want everybody to get away from this conversation with is please complain, so that it's a form of communication. So if you voice discomfort in some part of your body, there is no shame in it. If you had a headache, you would have zero problem saying my head hurts. So why would it be problematic for 52% of the planet to say it hurts in my pelvic area, or for the time that I'm bleeding, I feel like I'm dying, or my intestines are in knots, or I have disruptions with my bowel habits. It's physiology. It's simple physiology. This is what I emphasize. There is no one system of the body that is completely separate from another system. And if you're okay talking about, cardiac discomfort, your heart hurts, angina, am I having a heart attack? My head hurts, I have a migraine or something. Then why can't you say, hey, my uterus hurts and my insides feel like they're trying to kill me? Just complaining.
I want to say, as a Jewish person, I am also master complainer. It is one of my favorite things to do. It was taught to me by my mother, and she was taught by her mother. But being in England, where it's very much, it's like the opposite, and like English culture is like, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you. I didn't want to kick up a fuss, blah, blah, blah. And then I just demonstrate to all my friends how to complain. And they ask me if we need to talk to the waiter or something. Um, but what I would say for advice of how do you get better at complaining and having those uncomfortable conversations, practice with the smaller things. So like find your friend, have a little moan sesh, and then it kind of like, that will build up your confidence for when you get to the doctor. And then they say something like, oh, having menstrual pain is just part of being a woman. Be like, I'm whipping out all my complaining. This is what I've been practicing for.
Oh, and pain is a vital sign.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
no,
It's there
no
for a reason.
pain is normal. There, the baseline is not hurting. So if you have pain, that is a problem. You could just be like, "Oh, I thought we weren't supposed to be in pain. Is there? Can you please explain?" Be curious. Go. Oh, that's interesting. Could you say more about that? In your experience, what is a normal amount of pain, doctor?
Love the advice about starting on the personal. I particularly like complaining to the men in my life. It's led to some very educational conversations, and gotten them to ask questions that they would be otherwise afraid to ask. But to that point, we've got a viewer commenting in, love what you said, Florence. I'm interested in the Vagina Museum and how that has helped have these uncomfortable conversations. What are some roadblocks that you faced in your journey?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good question because there have been barriers. Um, and I've categorized them in different ways. And some types of roadblocks are easier to get over than others. So in the UK, part one really big roadblock is transphobia. So it's really big problem here. And what I would say is most people actually aren't transphobic. They just don't really know anything and they just kind of want to get on with their lives. But the minority, the very loud minority who are transphobic, to be honest, there's not much you can do. You can only really change a person's mind who has been radicalized in that way if you have an emotional connection with them. So, like, I never bother fighting with people on the internet because, like, kind of what am I trying to achieve there? But if there's a friend of mine who has expressed problematic beliefs, then the best way to get over that type of roadblock is to have an emotional connection with them first, and like understand them and really be curious about why they think certain ways. Because, like, when have you ever changed your mind because someone yelled at you? You know? Um, so yeah, kindness. But there are other types of blocks. So one is what I would call like the morality police. I've been told by a lot of people who are like, oh, vaginas are supposed to stay private. This is not something we talk about in a public space. With people like that, I try and understand best for where they're coming from and then approach it from there. So, and that's why I call them like the morality police, because a lot of the time, what they're actually trying to do is like protect their communities and they protect their families. And they think that like they're trying to protect their children. So I'll give you an example. Once I flew to Canada for a conference and I was stopped at the border. Why are you here? What are you coming for? So I'm here for a conference. What do you do for work? It's like, I'm the director of the Vagina Museum. And he looked at me and I was like, oh God, how is he going to react? And he was like, oh, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's awful. Why would you? That's horrible. Why would you have a vagina museum? Like vagina is supposed to be private. And I was like, I can't yell at this man because I'm literally at the border and I can't be deported. Um, so I thought about it and I was like, well, did you know that in the UK, a quarter of young women don't go for their cervical screenings because they are too embarrassed of their vulvas? And the Vagina Museum seeks to address that kind of embarrassment so that people are comfortable to go to their doctors. And his face completely changed. And he said, my aunt had cervical cancer. Is that really true that people aren't going for this life-saving test because they're too embarrassed? That is absolutely awful. I think what you're doing at the Vagina Museum is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Welcome to Canada. And honestly, I think that's the quickest I've ever changed anyone's mind. Just because I was very I happened to hit upon exactly the right stat that would change his mind. And that's why I actually don't get too angry at the morality police, because really what's happening is that they deeply love the people in their lives, and they want to make sure that they have the best. They've just been told by society that the best is stigma. Do you know what I mean? And then one more roadblock, and then I'll go to the next question, is the trolls. So people who just think of it as a joke, and you know, which makes it hard because you're like, I'm trying to have a serious conversation. But the way I get over that is having a joke with them. So, for example, because then it's about the emotional connection. It's always about emotional connection. I'll give you one more example. I'm at the Vagina Museum. I'm working the front desk because someone's called in sick. These teenage boys come in, happened a lot in Camden Market, and they saw this worksheet that we have near the front door where it's like name the anatomy. And he picks it up, and these teenage boys are like, oh yeah, it's so funny. And they come over to me and they're like, oh, miss, can we see a real vagina here? And I was like, and again, I'm not going to yell at these teenage boys because like they have that at school. They don't need that from me. And I was like, well, you actually can't see a real vagina here, but maybe somewhere else in Camden. And they were like, Miss, you funny. And they were like, uh, they started asking me all these questions. Um, like they asked me, could I put it in the wrong hole? Um, and they were actually pointed at the urethra. I thought they were going to point at, the other one. I was like, no, no, you really couldn't. And then it kind of turned from like jokey questions into like more serious questions. They were like, if I had sex with someone and they were pregnant, would that like hurt the baby? And I realized throughout that conversation that these were boys who knew nothing, absolutely nothing, because everything they had got was from porn and from their friends. And actually, they came into a space where there was a person who wasn't going to shame them, which for a teenage boy is the worst thing in the world, for not knowing something, especially not knowing things about sex. And then, yeah, I mean, we talked for like an hour. It was fantastic. So there you go. Emotional connection.
Nailed it right on the head. And we're getting a flood of questions coming in. So I'm going to wrap up with one last one. I realize we only have 5 minutes. And this is for the panel. What Florence shared about involving men and building emotional connections is so true. How are you wonderful people creating safe spaces to have these conversations with others who do get periods? I feel like talking about this, even with my mom, is difficult sometimes.
Yeah, one thing I've learned on my journey is like to have another topic. So you actually create separation. Like it doesn't need to be you're talking to your mom or a friend about your own period. I think that might be a difficult, like immediate first step. And then it becomes traumatizing when there's not support or care around something that's really important that directly affects you. And I learned that from the marathon story going viral. And I learned the role of having like a third entity that you can talk about. I think the Vagina Museum is a great example because it can be two people visiting the Vagina Museum and they're reacting to something in front of them rather than kind of battling it out about their own personal experiences, which is emotionally charged and then creates shutdown and then creates the inability to sort of open that conversation up again. And I think, when the marathon story went viral, it was like trending on the internet at that time, 2015, for 4 or 5 days because it just gave people this other entity that was not personal to them to react to feel a way about, to talk about. And so, for me, whether it's the music and the lyrics, Dr. Fruit earlier said, like, there's no humans without menstruation. We have a lyric in one of my songs. It's like, like the system must make room for all that we do. We've been bleeding each month till we gave birth to you. And so just kind of like hitting people with lyrics, but then also exactly the emotional connection, dancing, positivity, open-heartedness, softness with this message. That's the way that I personally have used art, and then yeah, the marathon story to foster these conversations in more like softer ways.
And for me, the men are fundamental. They are half the equation when it comes to reproduction. And if they are better educated, then they can help better. They can support their partners better. They can empathize better. They can have it deepens the understanding of what it is that these important people in your life are going through. No one, unless you're a monk, I guess, but even they have nuns they interact with, goes through life without interacting with someone with a uterus who bleeds, right? And it's fundamental to understand why that happens and what role they can play in making that person's life better. Because, as Florence was saying, people do care about the people directly in their lives. And so, education and curiosity. Somebody says, "Oh, I would never do IVF." I go, well, what do you understand about IVF? Right? Just, just curiosity. I have found that just asking that question has led us down a path where all of a sudden I have these staunch Catholics who are like, I would never, ever reproduce this way. I explain to them the whole process. And then they're doing IVF and they're checking the genetics. Why? Because the female partner has been through 4 miscarriages, for example, and they love their wife more than they love the idea of never having to do IVF. They would like a child without torturing their partner. So, encouraging the men to step into the conversation and making space for them and just asking why or what their understanding is, and then explaining things in a simple to understand, non-judgmental way and not rolling my eyes, because nobody understands reproduction. I know that. Even when I see doctors, they don't. So I just keep it simple.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. When you zoom out, menstrual stigma can look like this incredibly difficult problem to solve that we don't have much autonomy over. But as our panelists have brought home today, we can each do something. We can each, every one of us, take the moment to connect, to work past our own stigma and start these conversations to enact a macro change. And with that, I want to turn this over to the Desai Foundation so they can discuss how to donate and support.
Mega, unless you want to take it away, I can go for it.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. So the idea here is to take the pledge. Stigmas can come in many shapes or forms, and the outcomes of those stigmas can be keeping girls from school, or making a girl not feel comfortable learning about your period, or even experiencing her period. And so, how do we um, try to create that first step in breaking the stigmas? So we invite all of you here on the panel and everyone in the audience to go to pledgeyourperiod.com and take the pledge and say, pledge your period to keep girls in school, to break the stigma, to ensure that, everyone that bleeds has the information that they need, or that men are not embarrassed, that there are so many different ways that we want people to participate. And what's great about this Pledge Your Period campaign is that you can bring your own experience. So we have some easy to use templates that you can use on the website. But if you want to do your own, you should get creative with it. We've had folks, Ari Ufser wrote her own song a couple years ago, and we've had a lot of really fun pledges. We at the Desai Foundation work across 8 states in health, livelihood, and menstrual equity to ensure that folks can cultivate dignity and live a life that they choose. And so you can visit us at thedesaifoundation.org and learn more about our work. You can learn more about the incredible Supreme Court case, Article 21, that is advancing menstrual health in India. And you can also learn more about the events that we host in New York and Boston and around the world by joining our newsletter on thedesaifoundation.org. And we hope to see you on social media pledging your period. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for the panelists, for the guests. And thank you, Colby, Arushi, and Mega, for being instrumental in putting this together. Amazing.
Awesome. Mega V, you can turn off the YouTube live. And Arushi, you can stop recording and just make sure